Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net. It's winter time and the holidays are upon us in just a couple of days, and I started to think about, well, what can I do for this holiday? I've already done some of my other ideas previously would have been, well, why don't you just tell some of my favorite holiday time stories or something. And I've already done that. I did that on my site a few years prior, and you can check it out on my editorial section. And then I thought, well, why don't I link some of my favorite Christmas-related fan-made content? And I've already done that as well. I did that a few Christmases ago. So I got to thinking, well, what would I do this Christmas? And I realized that, honestly, I don't really tell that many personal stories about myself or my origins. You guys don't really know. I mean, I have occasionally, scratched the surface on some of my personal stories whenever it was relevant to a video game related topic. But I've never really talked in depth about myself or what my credentials are. And the reason why is because, well, I kind of didn't really think that they were that important, especially given the fact of, I think my knowledge and my expertise would be more than willing to, if you wanted to talk about my background, for example. It's not, my current knowledge is more important than I always thought than my background. This is coming from a person basically who always thought of performance over expertise, that sort of stuff. Judge me by my performance, don't judge me by my expertise. Can I do the job, can I not do the job, that sort of thing. But there were a few stories of my past that I've actually been wanting to share with you for quite a while. And most of them have to do with video game genres and my fondest memories of video game genres. This is not a Mind of Maniac. I honestly don't know what I'm going to label this when I finally do post it up, but I was inspired recently. There's a guy on YouTube. He has great reviews. He did a great review of 1776, the musical. And he's got a great ongoing series of the Batman music, the original Batman serials, actually, from the 1940s. His name is Mr. Fusion. I don't know what his real name is. But he's recently on his YouTube channel been talking about his Final Fantasy memories. In particular, he's doing videos on each particular Final Fantasy game that he's played. And I was kind of inspired by that because I honestly have some memories of Final Fantasy that I've wanted to share with you guys for a while, and of other classic console or Japanese role-playing games, whatever you prefer to call them, that I really haven't been able to share with you guys. And the reason why is because, let's be honest, I've never beaten a Final Fantasy game before. I've never even played through a Final Fantasy game before. I've played and dabbled and seen clips, and I'm very aware. I've watched a lot of documentaries on the series. I've never seen a full Let's Play of one of the games, but I have been watching some pretty in-depth documentaries and some pretty in-depth, so I'm familiar with the history and the content involved in the games and the game series, but I've never specifically played them. So I never wanted to do like a Final Fantasy podcast, at least not until I mean, let's face it, there's well over 14 Final Fantasy games to play, to say nothing of the spin-off games and stuff like that. I would never be able to play through all those games, even if I started now, and I'm only now starting to play Final Fantasy 13 on my Xbox 360. I've got my PS3 version, I'm keeping that one in the wrappings. And ironically enough, I have realized I did actually go through a Final Fantasy kick a couple of summers ago, where I collected all the games and I just kept them all in the wrapping. I didn't actually play any of them. Twitch did a good review because Twitch has actually played most of those games. And Twitch actually did a decent review on my channel, and you can check that out if you want to. Just look up Twitch reviews Final Fantasy games. But there was a lot of other memories that I wanted to say that I felt I couldn't put anywhere else. And one or two stories in particular. Like I don't know if most of you guys know, but most of my memories of console games stopped at the Nintendo, the original Nintendo Entertainment System, or Famicom if you're a Japanese person. I never had a Super Nintendo or Super Famicom or anything like that. I went straight from a Nintendo game. I played the original classic platformers on it, and then stopped. And then I went to the PC, and I stayed at the PC for many, many years. So I thought to myself, I missed out on the 16-bit era. I mean, I played through many of the Sonic the Hedgehog games and stuff like that, but that was it. I never really played through any of the major 16-bit games. I didn't have a Super Nintendo. So what I did instead was I did a lot of research on it, but I do have many friends who did. And some of my favorite memories were hanging out with some of my friends growing up and playing games with them or watching games get played by them. And it's kind of funny looking back on it, the great games that I missed out on, but also that I watched my friends play. And I wanted to talk about some of my favorite stories. Growing up, I didn't really, especially when I was really young, the schools I went to sucked up until high school. So for the most part, up until high school, up until I was a freshman in high school, I have absolutely no positive memories of school whatsoever. So all of my good memories that I have are basically non-school related, especially when I was really young. So I was thinking back, especially recently, given the fact that we just had a blizzard and schools have been closed occasionally and delayed and stuff like that. Especially this weekend, it was just a really, really bad blizzard. And I started thinking about a time when, the last time we've had a blizzard like this, or one of my favorite memories of when we had a blizzard like this. And I wanted to tell that story for you guys. But first I want to get back maybe until about the mid-90s. I had a friend, and I don't really have a nickname for this person because I haven't talked to them in over probably 10 years or so. I really don't know how to refer to them, but this was pre-gamer tag, this was pre-handle, that sort of thing. So let's just, for a shortened story, let's just call this person Jay. And I used to hang out with this person. I knew this person from school. I used to hang out with them occasionally, not that often. And I remembered that this person actually did have a Super Nintendo. And we'd hang out, we'd go roller skating, or I use rollerblades, but you get my meaning. We do physical activities and stuff like that, but whenever I'd hang out at his place, we'd talk about the music of the day, and we'd play Super Nintendo games. And he was really into a bunch of different Super Nintendo games, many of which would probably be considered staples of today's era, or that era. He was really into Blaster Master, which I believe it was an NES game, but he did have an NES as well. He was also really into Street Fighter 2. I can't remember which version he was playing, but he definitely loves playing two-player Street Fighter 2. And I remember playing against him and him kicking my butt occasionally on that one, but, you know, it was Street Fighter. And, but there were two other games that he'd play on a regular basis that whenever I was over and saw him, that I was fascinated with, that I could not get enough. I wanted to see him play it all I could. And the first was Chrono Trigger, which I'm sure many of you guys know. Nowadays, Chrono Trigger is available on multiple different platforms, including the DS. Heck, you can probably get it on your smartphone right now. It's even on the Wii Virtual Console. So, but that was my first experience with Chrono Trigger. Now, growing up, I loved time travel stories, science fiction, that sort of stuff. And here I was seeing this fascinating artistic style. And he was pretty far in the game when I started watching him play it. He was already with Robo and stuff like that. In fact, I think he was even doing that, you know, he was leading a boss, I think it was a master of something, and they had to beat this boss, and then he taught them like some very important thing or something like that. He was really a good guy. I can't remember what the name of this bad guy was, or boss, but he was fighting through that sequence with Robo and Chrono and somebody else. And they were going through spots, you know, portals of time and stuff like that. It was just an awesome, awesome, awesome looking game. I loved the music. I loved the art style. I thought, wow, this game is just freaking awesome. It sucks that I don't have a Super Nintendo and I can't play it. And that game really stuck with me. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but obviously you guys know it today, and I know it today as Chrono Trigger. The other game that he liked to play, and he actually let me play through the opening of it, was a game called Earthbound. Now, I didn't know it was called Earthbound at the time. All I knew was that you could set up the game's names and almost immediately, and you could give it ideas and stuff like that. And I was kind of fascinated, not just by the music and the art style, but also by the gameplay. It was telling a story about aliens and a meteorite landing and things like that, and like a super-powered buzzing bee or something like that. And again, I didn't know it was Earthbound, but once again, I always just remembered fondly playing it and seeing how the game's world worked. Now, fast forward a little bit. At this point, I'm in high school, and I've met Twitch. Twitch, who you know, is my resident on the website, classic role-playing game, Mac Gamer now. And I had just met him in high school. In fact, we went to high school together. Now, at that time, Twitch was very much into the classic role-playing games from Japan. He loved the Square Enix games. I'm sorry, the Square games. This was before Square Enix. And one of the games that we talk about all the time, he was very much into Chrono Trigger. And this is when I remembered, oh, this was a game I used to play with Jay back in the day. It's called Chrono Trigger, is it? And I remember that he and we were just being bad kids, and I totally admit that. This was, I don't know, probably 10, 12, no, this was longer than that. This was over 12 years ago. He and I were just being bad kids, and we tried to get Chrono Trigger running on the computers at the time and stuff like that, and we tried playing it. And I was, again, just wowed by the game's opening, and this is the first time I got to really check out the game's opening, and I just thought, wow, this game is awesome. Opens up in a fair. It's got a really good art style to it. And I remember this was a game I used to play with Jay way back in the day. I wished I could have had a Super Nintendo or something that could have played it back in the day. And now, of course, I do, so I actually have downloaded a copy of Chrono Trigger to my Wii. And I also have the PS3, I'm sorry, the PS1 version of it when I went through my Final Fantasy purchasing kick a couple of summers ago. But at the time, I didn't have anything that could have played it, and Twitch had a copy, so we tried to get it running on the PCs at school, and we were able to, and we had some fun playing it. And I thought, wow, these role-playing games, I never really played role-playing games. This is something different, but Twitch was really excited about it. And today, Twitch would tell me, I've considered him my resident Final Fantasy guru, but the truth is he likes a lot of role-playing games more than just the Final Fantasy games. In fact, he told me, unlike most other people who would say Final Fantasy VII was their favorite game, he was telling me that Final Fantasy VI or 3 in the United States was his favorite. And for the most of the part, there are a lot of other games that he likes outside, classic role-playing games, and Chrono Trigger was one of them. He didn't just play certainly Final Fantasy games. He's very much into other classic role-playing games. And I remember, I'm like, at some point I have to be able to get my hands on Chrono Trigger. And I distinctly remember the day that it came out on the Wii Virtual Console, I downloaded it and bought it and everything else. And I was happy. Unfortunately, I've never been able to beat the game. I think I was stuck in the far future, and I kind of got stuck at a boss there or something like that. I could never beat that boss. But, to each their own, I guess. So, there's that story. And I think that's kind of what got me hooked, at least for the start of role-playing games. And I wanted to see role-playing games more. And I distinctly remember, I think what put the nail on, what put the final interest in me was kind of a day like today, where everything was covered in snow and all the trees were covered in ice. And this was still in high school, and I was friends with the unknown camera person, who I mentioned in previous other videos, and identity will not be revealed at any respect. Out of respect for their wishes, I am not going to reveal their identity or anything about them. So, I remember that this was on a Friday, I think, and I was still in high school, and the unknown camera person and I went to different schools, but the unknown camera person lived down the street from me, so it was no big deal to just kind of go down the street, even in the snow, and say hi to them and hang out at their place. So I went over to their house, and we were playing games on the PC, maybe a little Quake, shareware, maybe a little, we were gossiping about South Park or something like that. And the unknown camera person told me, hey, I have a neighbor we could probably hang out with too. He'd love to hang out with us. And it was true. The unknown camera person had a neighbor at the time who I knew from camp. This person, I'm going to call him T. Again, this is pre-gamer tag. I don't know what to call them today. I haven't talked to them in probably, gosh, maybe 20 years. I haven't talked to them in a long time. And the unknown camera person's neighbor, T, lived literally the house right behind theirs. And you could walk through the snow right over to their house. So we go over to T's house, and T is playing Final Fantasy VII. And he had this really big, or big for the time, 40-inch projection screen television. And projection screens, you're probably telling me, those are pretty obsolete nowadays. They don't really have the picture quality of an LED or something like that. And the truth is they didn't. Heck, they didn't really have the picture quality of a CRT back in the day. But one thing they could do that CRTs couldn't do was give really big screens. And again, this was not high definition. This was in standard definition. These were not widescreen televisions. These were basically just big square televisions. But it was cool seeing somebody play a game on a TV like that. And I distinctly remember when we went over to T's house, T had a really cute little dog and loved me for some odd reason. I have no idea why. But I remember sitting over at T's house with the unknown camera person, petting T's dog, whose name I don't know, and watching T play Final Fantasy. And just like I was wowed by watching my friend Jay play all of these classic games on the 16-bit system, here I was watching T play all these classic games on a 32-bit system. And I thought to myself, I didn't have a PlayStation at the time. I am missing out on something just by sticking with the PC. And that was my first exposure to Final Fantasy VII, watching T play it. And honestly, I've been wanting to play Final Fantasy VII ever since. I was not able to actually find a copy of it physically for a reasonable amount of money at a time where I could find copies of games like Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy X-2, Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy XIII-2 for less than, well, with the exception of Final Fantasy XIII-2, because it was brand new at the time, for less than 20 bucks a pop. No joke. I could not find a copy of Final Fantasy VII for less than $250 at that time. Yeah, brand new. Now, as far as I know, Final Fantasy VII has been in print for just as long as Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy IX is. It was re-released as many times as I think it was. I can't for the life of me figure out why that game was so overpriced, and I still don't to this day. But regardless, I was able to download it on the PlayStation 3 and PSPs through the Sony network. So I was able to get the game digitally. I would have preferred a physical copy, but, you know, to each their own, I guess. And I remember distinctly playing Final Fantasy VII with T over at their place and just loving every second of it. Fast forward a couple of years later, I went to France. I was with a group of foreign exchange students. We went to France for about, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks or so. And I was staying with a roommate who was also from the United States. I'll call him J2. And he was also a big console role-playing game fan. In fact, I remembered actually, I did have a PlayStation at that time. But this was just at around the time when the PlayStation 2 was being released. And there were some people, while it was hard to find, there were some people who did have PS2s. And some of my early memories of having, of seeing PlayStation 2 games were over at J2's house. So we got back from France, and J2 and I actually stayed friends for a while. I think he moved. I think he moved, and we had I never really was there. I didn't have a contact information or something like that, so I stopped. I didn't get a chance to talk. I think he moved. But my point is that he was also really into the role-playing games, and this was at a time when Final Fantasy IX was out, but also Chrono Cross was out, which was a game that was like the big release because it was a sequel to Chrono Trigger. Nowadays, I think that a lot of people probably don't remember that game as fondly as they do Chrono Trigger, because it strayed a lot from the original Chrono Trigger formula from what I've heard. I don't know, I haven't really played it. I do know that the music in the opening cinematic itself is probably considered one of, at least by Twitch, one of the best opening cinematics ever. And I agree with him strictly because as a visual and auditory package, you gotta have both. You gotta have that great music from Chrono Cross with the visuals of that opening, and that's what kind of makes it that big package. But I've never played Chrono Cross before. So, if you ever wondered, when it finally did get to a point where you're probably asking yourself, well, when did it finally all come to a head? When did I finally start getting into the role-playing games in general? When did I finally start playing? And that, of course, was when everything finally came together, when Iron Storm released Anachronox, which was a game made by, it was directed by Tom Hall of Wolfenstein fame and Commander Keen fame. He developed Anachronox, which was a PC role-playing game. But it borrowed heavily from games like Chrono Trigger and Earthbound. It just recreated it on the PC. And I remember playing through Anachronox multiple times and loving every second of it. And I think that's where I finally realized, when I was playing through Anachronox, I do like these games. And I really got to get, at some point, I've really got to start seeking these games out. And a couple of years ago, I went on a bit of a role-playing game kick and purchased all the Final Fantasy games that I could from the PlayStation, PlayStation 2, and PlayStation 3 era. Hopefully at some point I'll get a chance to be able to finally play them and do a podcast on them. So I hope you guys have enjoyed my ramblings on my background when it comes to role-playing games. That was the spark for me when it came to RPGs. And I gotta say, I'm grateful to my friends for igniting that spark with me. So I hope you guys are staying safe and warm if you happen to be in very cold climate conditions right now. Maybe I'll be doing, I'm going to listen to the comments on this one. Maybe if you guys want to hear another story like my history with shooters and stuff like that, I might do one later this week. We'll see what people think about this video. So until next time, guys, this is Maniac with GameAccess.net. Over and out.